Good morning and welcome to UPN Focus. I'm your host, Milt Thompson, and really appreciate the significant amount of interest shown in our television show. If you've got cards, letters, comments, or thoughts, why don't you just send them in, email them in, write them in, call me, stop me on the street, say, Milt, I like that show, I don't want to hear about that. I do like to hear about the things you talked about last week in your show. But we really do appreciate it. We've got another special show for you this morning that we believe is another community service that exists in our community that perhaps you aren't quite aware of and never know when you are in a crisis situation whether or not you'll need crisis assistance. We're going to talk with our good friends Dan Steiner and Carol Houpt. I told you I could do that. I told you I could do that. And they're visiting with us here on UPN Focus from the Crisis Pregnancy Center. As the president, Dan, this organization, which has a fairly noble mission, tell us a little bit about its beginnings and your association with it.
Glad to do that. Glad you asked. Crisis Pregnancy Center has been around a lot longer than Dan Steiner, 16 years in the city of Indianapolis. Actually was started as an effort by Dr. Billy Graham, C. Everett Koop, and Francis Schaefer Sr., who looked at the issue of unplanned pregnancy and abortion, all the issues really surrounding that in America, and they said, what is a good Protestant response to that? And they said, there is none. And so they went about major metropolitan areas in the country with a film series called Whatever Happened to the Human Race to try to garner community support for centers to help girls in the middle of unplanned pregnancies. Apart from the firestorm of rhetoric that often surrounds the issue, particularly the abortion aspect of it, to compassionately and practically help these women in the name of the church, the Protestant church at large. That's Churches of God, that's Christian churches, that's Baptist churches, that's African Methodist Episcopalian churches, that's any church you can name that has a heart.
An ecumenical approach to Protestant representation.
A biblical approach, a faith-based approach. To not just debate the issue, Milt, but really to help the women in the middle of it. I think that so often people that take a pro-life perspective to this issue get characterized as either violent or overly zealous and radical in their approach, and this stands in stark contradiction to that. We are here to compassionately help these women with housing, with baby clothes, baby furniture, maternity clothes, whatever they need so that they have the ability to make a decision. Now, they come to us, about 8,000 of them a year, for free pregnancy tests. And our trained army of volunteer ladies, like Carol here, about 240 of them here just in the Indianapolis area, we'll talk with them and counsel with them, love them and help them through the midst of this difficult, often panicked time of their life, helping them to make a life plan and not make a panicked response to this that so often leads to abortion.
You suggested, and it's very clearly true, kind of a political hot potato, the whole issue of either unwanted pregnancies or the termination of a pregnancy. Is there some political philosophy that you espouse, or do you try to stay away from that kind of controversy?
We do indeed feel that the issue of pregnancy termination, unplanned pregnancies, is not a political issue. This is the human side of that whole genre of discussion. It is people, one life at a time, that are caught in the midst of the problem. Apart from the bureaucrats, apart from the political races and endorsements or disendorsements, this is helping people. And so we are a social service agency and a ministry and extension of the churches of Indianapolis to try to help them. We don't debate, nor do we have a full political statement or stance on the issue. Our stance is we're for women and we're for helping them through the midst of their difficulties. And let me give you an example of how that is most clearly seen. A young lady came to us several months ago, and she came for us as the other 8,000 do, 7,999 for a free pregnancy test. Now, when she came, she counseled with us. She was indeed pregnant, and we told her about her options for parenting, and we don't soft pedal that either. I've got 5 kids in and out of the house, and it's a challenging thing sometimes, particularly as they become teenagers. But
I can identify with that.
Yeah, there you go. And we also talked to her about adoption, which was her other option. And then we talked to her about abortion, what it would do to her, the child, all of the facts on the issue. She decided, subsequent to that, to abort. She went off and terminated her pregnancy. And she came back, must have been 3 or 4 weeks later, and with a phone call to the center, and she said, I really feel bad about the decision I made. And an observer said, why you didn't talk to her? Isn't she the enemy? I mean, she decided against what your quote-unquote philosophical position is. And we said, no, she's not the enemy. She's a person that needs a demonstration of Christian compassion in the middle of this issue. And so we did talk to her. We have a whole area, which Carol will detail a little bit later, that surrounds post-abortion and all of the emotion and grief that so often accompanies that. And so we're there regardless of their choice that they make. In that regard, I guess truly we're a pro-choice organization. We want them to choose, but we want them to make an informed decision and have all the facts.
Well, vis-a-vis other organizations that deal with this kinds of issue, is there some relationship or otherwise with Planned Parenthoods or some of the other organizations that deal in similar kind of industry, if you will?
Mm-hmm. Planned Parenthood does refer clients to us. They're really not equipped to help women through an unplanned pregnancy so much as we are, and so there's some common ground there that we deal with. Other than that, we have very little interaction with them.
Well, it appears to me that given the type of counseling, and that's what it appears to be, at some level of counseling experience, I'm certain that you probably are engaged with professional staff and or contract or volunteer professionals, and what can one avail themselves of in terms of the services once they've discovered this crisis in their life and they want to come to you?
Our primary goods and wear, if you will, consists of referrals, and we are the agency in the Indianapolis area, probably in the state of Indiana, that sees the largest number of early-term pregnant girls 11 weeks and under. So by virtue of that number of girls, we're also the agency that does the most referrals into the service delivery system in all of its glory in Indianapolis, whether that be St. Francis Hospital or whether that be a local community medical center. We exist to try to help that girl have a healthy pregnancy outcome once she decides to carry to term. While we wouldn't refer for a termination of pregnancy, we do refer prolifically throughout the city to many other agencies. Within the structure of Crisis Pregnancy Center, we have the ability to house women, to help them financially, to help them through all of the issues that surround the decision of carrying a child-determined parenting. And we also offer free medical service. In fact, all of our services are free, and that's ultrasonography. 1 out of every 6 pregnancies in the state of Indiana end in miscarriage. And so we, when a woman comes in, give them an opportunity, if they're so needing it, to have a full diagnostic medical sonogram right there on the premises.
So obviously you've got to do some sort of a diagnostic, if you will, relative to what the problem exists, to offer some counseling, then serve as a brokerage to other service providers out there. I think I'm starting to get that message. We want to talk about your staffing, your volunteers. We'll want to get into Carol about what she does and why she does what she does and why you do what you do. And we're going to do that right after these very special messages from our sponsors. We'll be right back. Welcome back to UPN Focus. We've been talking about the Crisis Pregnancy Center with our guest, Dan Steiner, who's the president of the Crisis Pregnancy Center, and talking about its organizational efforts and its mission in the community. A lot of referrals. You serve as a brokerage. You get people in need to services that they need and still try to provide, I would guess, some sort of message relative to how they carry forward in their lives for it to be prospective. It's not always the easiest chore when you're dealing with people who have difficult decisions to make. Carol, I know that you spend a great deal of your time as a volunteer at the Crisis Pregnancy Center. Why have you chosen that as your charity of choice?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because that's very important to me. 10 years ago, I had become a Christian, and 20 years prior to, or actually 20 years ago this year, I was pregnant myself in a crisis pregnancy center situation. I was married to an abusive alcoholic who did not want our child, and basically had threatened me and said that if you do not have an abortion, I'll make you lose this child. And I felt I really didn't have a choice. I was too ashamed to go home and tell my parents about it, and too ashamed to tell them that I was in an abusive relationship. So, fearing that I would lose him, I went ahead and had the abortion by myself. He did not go with me, did not support me, and 2 months later left me anyway. And I was devastated. I had not told a soul about it. I did not tell my best friend. I had not told my family, and I kept that secret for years. Just feeling condemnation on my own, feeling guilt, feeling shame and remorse at this decision that I had made, feeling also that I did not have a choice in a different direction. Crisis Pregnancy Center did not exist at that time, and I didn't really have anyone to counsel me through it. When I had called the abortion clinic, they just said, come in, make the appointment, it'll be done and over with and no problem. There was absolutely no post-abortive counseling whatsoever. I mean, there wasn't anyone there to talk to.
So the trauma, the stigma, and really we're talking about in most of our audience's lifetimes, that there exists a caring community like ours that could not offer you an alternative. And now we have that alternative, and it is your effort to try to give something back to that. What do you do in your volunteer role at the center?
Well, 2 years ago, Crisis Pregnancy Center implemented a Bible study, and it's for post-abortive women. It's called Forgiven and Set Free, and that's exactly what it's all about. These women come into this Bible study, and they're there for 9 to 10 weeks, and they're committed to doing their homework, and basically that consists of working through the workbook, doing the study, but also opening up on their feelings that they have hidden for so long. I can tell you a story about a woman who I had that was in her 60s that had an abortion years ago before it was even legal in a back alley. She had it done in a motel room by someone who did not know what they were doing and lived with that trauma for years. Thankfully, she was able to have 2 sons, but her sons were grown, her husband had died, and they still none of them knew that she had had an abortion. She carried that secret for all that time, feeling guilty about it. Sitting in her church, she felt condemned that no one would forgive her knowing what she had done. And so she lived with that, and she went through our class, and she was just a totally different person. She wound up telling her 2 sons about it. They felt a tremendous amount of weight lifted from their mother and feeling like, oh, Mom, I wish you had just told us that. We could have helped you through all that. But she didn't. And so many of our women out there, know about abortion, but they don't know that there is another side to feeling forgiven after they've gone through it. And it is a trauma. It is a definite trauma. We talk about post-abortion syndrome. Women go through anorexia, they become bulimic, and that's what happened to me. I went through years of anorexia, depression. I had come to my wit's end feeling like I didn't want to live anymore because I had kept that for such a long time as a secret. And that secret haunted me until I let go of it and I let the Lord heal me in that. It was going to stay there. And so I said, I want to do something for women, even if I can talk one woman into the fact that you are forgiven and you're set free from this. And the hardest part that they have is forgiving themselves. They can say, well, I'm forgiven, but they don't feel it in their, they don't feel it in their soul or their heart, and they need that.
Tell me a little bit about the environment there. You obviously speak from a great deal of compassion, passion, because of your personal experiences. But I don't think anyone can really realize the total sense of hopelessness that people feel when they are confronted with issues about which they have no answers. What's a typical environment that you see yourself in the role of volunteering?
Well, when the women come in, they're extremely terrified. They don't want to talk about the issue. A lot of women can't even say the word abortion. And it's just phenomenal, the fact that they come in and they are so closed. But then by the time that we go through this whole issue, they're ready to talk about it, and they're ready to get it out. And they're willing to talk to other women about it. But until they get that out and are willing to talk about it, it won't get dealt with.
Obviously, an organization like this, Mr. Steiner, is one that requires a great deal of volunteer assistance and help. It also requires, although you apparently have plenty of clients, it requires some budget. It requires money to be able to operate it effectively, to be able to access those kinds of services for those in need. Organizationally, how are you set up and established, and how can people contribute money to it, or how do you raise your money to operate that budget?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Milt.
Most presidents of organizations are very interested in the answer to that one.
Well, we do indeed have many volunteers, over 200 as I've mentioned, and yet there's a staff of 18 people which man 7 centers in and around Indianapolis. We have north, south, east, and west, as well as outlying counties, specifically Boone County, Hendricks County, and Hancock County east. Each one of those has a staff person that represents the organization, and then we have administrative people downtown to do the bookkeeping and such with the organization. All of this amounts to a budget of over $1 million a year. Now that is resourced through a number of different channels. The one I really was excited about speaking with you about today, though, was a Walk for Life that we do. This is an annual event. I believe this is the 13th year that this has been happening in our city. In fact, I even brought a really neat brochure here that shows the Walk for Life. And what this is it's a grassroots event where literally thousands of people sponsor hundreds of walkers that come out and say to the community, we care about women that are in the middle of unplanned pregnancies enough to take a couple hours on September 9th and come to one of our 3 locations in the city, so one of the biggest walks in the city, and help raise money to keep Crisis Pregnancy Center and Dan Steiner paid. So that's what the Walk for Life is about.
And what are some of your other funding sources?
Yes.
Obviously, $1 million budget is probably not going to get raised 100% on September 9th, although we implore all of you on September 9th, call them and get out there and go walk to help these people in need.
And if they wanted to do that, they could call 925-KIDS to do it. But you're right, there are other sources, obviously. The greatest source is individuals, thousands of them, who support with their tax-deductible gifts to our center. We also have many businesses that support us, and literally hundreds of churches in and around Indianapolis. We're not under any denomination, but are funded by just dozens and hundreds of churches that care about this particular issue, and that we're their representatives in the community.
Well, I just bet that you're probably not overfunded for the clientele that you represent. When we come back here after these short messages, I want to talk with you about how this mission can be spread in a much more fulfilling way. We'll do that right after these short words. Crisis Pregnancy Center, that's been our topic here on UPN Focus today. We've been doing that with Dan Steiner, who's their president, and with Carol Houpt, who's one of their top volunteers, who told us about what has really compelled her to this mission. Several locations, several opportunities for participation. You get your referrals from, how do we break down the stigma of those with unwanted pregnancies to avail themselves of your services?
Well, to know that first that when they walk into the center that they'll be helped that moment. 65% of the women that come to us they just see our sign and drive in and say, I wonder if I am pregnant. And I don't want anyone to know, and so all of our services are confidential. I don't have money to see a doctor. All of our services are free. And without discrimination, we see women that live in Carmel, we see women that live in the inner city. Without regard to race, fully 40% of the clients that we see are African American. So we have a great mix of clientele. We receive referrals from physicians, from community medical centers, from WIC offices all over the city. There are many different sources by which they can access our services. We have 4 centers in and around Indianapolis that they can come to, on Keystone Avenue and 71st Street, at 31 and Thompson Road, at 10th and Arlington, and in the Eagledale Plaza within the Marion County and City of Indianapolis. All these places are open from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. and 4 hours on Saturday from 9 until noon. So they're here for anyone that really has a need. And in those centers, you'll not find a judgment, but you'll find a friend, someone that's willing to help.
Carol, what advice would you have for those who are staring down significant life crises that involved unwanted pregnancies? What would you tell them to get themselves some help?
Well, irregardless of what your situation is, you know, whether you were in an abusive relationship as I was or you weren't, or whatever your circumstances are, whatever walk you're coming from, we're available for you. I think what they need to be aware of is that, you know, you can come in and we'll talk to you. No matter what your circumstance, no matter what you need, we'll be there for you.
And our audience out here can help in all kinds of ways, not only by a referral to for those who they might discover are in trouble, and education about where they can get their problem solved, and they can also walk for life.
That would be good.
On September 9th.
Right.
And that number that they can call
is 925-5437. That's 925-KIDS.
925-KIDS, and they're going to take advantage of that on September 9th.
Right. It's at the Canal Walk and at Eagle Creek. So there's 2 convenient locations near you where you can choose from. And those numbers would also be a good number to call, that 925-KIDS number, if someone wanted to volunteer, take our training, volunteer in center, or volunteer at the walk.
And I must admit, it has to be a little fun if you were out there walking for a good cause and a good mission.
Bring the kids.
That's one of the wonderful activities going on around our community. Here are a few others on our community calendar.
Here are some events in our area for you to focus on. The YMCA of Marion is now taking registration for its fall classes. Learn to make quilts, clothes, cookies, and more. There are also classes for kids. Class size is limited and advanced registration is required. Call today to reserve your seat in a class. Women, plan to get smart about money at the first ever Indiana Every Woman's Money Conference. The conference is August 31st from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. at the Indiana Convention Center's Sagamore Ballroom. This one-day financial education event will feature Aaron Brockovich and Barbara Stanny. The event is free and daycare will be provided. And the Central Indiana Crisis Pregnancy Center is holding their 13th annual Walk for Life, Saturday, September 9th. Take a stroll through beautiful Indiana and help raise money for a worthy cause. We want to hear from you. Send your event information 3 weeks in advance to be a part of the UPN 23 community calendar.
And I know you'll take advantage of some of those wonderful opportunities, as well as an opportunity to walk for life for the Pregnancy Crisis Center here in Indianapolis. I want to thank our special guests, Dan Steiner, Carol Houpt, for participating on our show today, and look forward to seeing you right back here next week. This time, same station. Have a good week.